my name is Elaine Miranda, and I come from a country named Nicaragua. Do you know where that is? Yes. Where? Okay, I was going to say that the question is not valid for Latin people because I see a lot of Latin people, but for the rest, most people don't even know where Nicaragua is. And when Jessica from FinCon asked me to do this presentation, in the beginning I thought, why would I talk about crisis? And maybe that's something you're wondering as well, right? It's a tough subject, and at the same time, we're not always living in crisis, but when crises come, things get very messy. And when we talk about personal finance, it's even messier because then what can you say and what can't you say, right? So before I tell you my experience dealing with crisis and personal finance and financial education, I want to take you on a journey on what Nicaragua is, where it is, and what we've been going through for the past 5 or 6 years, right? So this is Nicaragua in the map. You can see there the US, then Mexico, and then all those countries in colors, that's Central America. And in the center of Central America, there's Nicaragua in red. So we know where we are, right? Okay, but location is not as important as the data that I want to share with you. What it is to live with under $200 a month. And so as you can see, minimum wage in Nicaragua is around $144. And although it is true that not the entire 6 million population live with under $200 a month, a lot of the population do. And we even have a lot of people, around 40% of the population, who live with under $2 a month. So how do you live under those conditions? And I also want you to take a look at the cost of the basket of goods sold. So you need around 3 salaries for one family to cover the entire basket of goods sold, right? You can see that the rate of unemployment seems low. It's only 3%, right? Sometimes in the US, you have higher rates than that. But when you look at the number below, which is the underemployment rate, that's where we are. And almost half of the population are underemployed. And what that means is that they're not making enough money and that they don't have any social security, any type of insurance. They're not legally working in their own country. So you have a lot of, self-made entrepreneurs, a lot of people selling stuff on the street. And so these people, most of the population in Nicaragua are already, their entire lives living day by day. Those are our normal circumstances. So what happens when a crisis comes? I mean, this already sounds like a crisis, right? Doesn't it? So let me take you on this journey, on what has happened in Nicaragua the past 5 years. This first slide that I want to talk about, if any of you take a picture or take a video or upload something on Instagram and tag me, please know that I'm not going to be allowed to repost or answer or share it in any way because I could literally go to jail in my country. So we have a political crisis that turned into an economic crisis, that turned into a social crisis, that turned into every possible kind of crisis that you can imagine all at the same time. So this is a kid. You can see in the picture, this is a kid. He's maybe 16 or 17 years old, and he's wearing the Nicaraguan flag, right? And he's protesting against the police that were, brutally killing and beating people up when people did not agree with the president, which is the president that we currently have. So this president came to Nicaragua for the first time in the 80s when the revolution came. And he was our president for almost 10 years. And then people voted him out. And then, because we tend to repeat history, right? We voted him again in the country in 2006. And although the Nicaraguan constitution does not allow for re-election ever, he changed the constitution. He re-elected himself for the past 3 or 4 periods. And not happy with that, when 2018 came, there was this huge bubble in Nicaragua, this huge fire that was already burning inside, and it all sort of exploded at the same time. And that's how we get to 2018. So people went into the streets to protest and say, we do not agree with what's going on. And that was the last picture that you see right there. That's Managua. That's the capital city of Nicaragua. That's one of our main avenues. And those are all the people with the Nicaraguan flags, saying, we do not agree. We have to do something about the country. And this march was on May 30th, 2018. May 30th is the day that in Nicaragua we celebrate Mother's Day. So what happened was, and it was called La Marcha de las Madres, which means the March of the Mothers, and around 30 people died that day, killed by the police. And so after that, we never went back to the streets. You're not even allowed to have a Nicaraguan flag anywhere in Nicaragua because it automatically means you're against the country, or you're against the president, or you're against the government. And so imagine under those conditions what happens. And you can see first, tourism dropped because obviously nobody wants to go to that country. I didn't want to be in my country. Why would other people want to come to my country, right? We lost around 320,000 jobs. Remember, this is a 6 million people population, right? So it's not a lot of people, so we lost a lot of jobs. A lot of people had to migrate, and this you're going to continue seeing around 100,000 people. And so interest rates obviously went up. The other day, somebody asked me from Mexico, how up can you go? Well, but you can go very, very high. So for example, we have loan sharks in Nicaragua. Remember that because the minimum wage is so low, they're not able to go to the bank and ask for a loan. That's the majority of the people. So they're trapped in these loan sharks month after month after month. Who wants to guess what the interest rate is? How much? 50 what? Annually? Yes. 360%. Thank you. Exactly. So people charge around 30% monthly. When you translate it, it's around 360% annually. So most of the people are not even able to pay back the principal, and they're only paying interest after interest after interest. But if you're only earning $200, $300, $500 a month, how do you live with that, right? After this crisis, COVID came. And we were still in that other crisis that I was talking about, right? So COVID came. I don't want to talk to you a lot about COVID, but just to tell you a little bit more about our government. Our government decided in the beginning that COVID did not exist, that it was not real, and almost basically prohibited people to wear masks. And then when all deaths started occurring, if you look at our data, our statistics in the country, you're going to see that only about 50%, around 50 people died of COVID. The rest died of pneumonia. Literally, that's what it says, right? So first I say there's no COVID. Please go out to the streets. Please continue your life. Please go to work. Please go to school. Please. And then when people start dying, I'm going to change the death reason, and I'm just going to say, well, we have a lot of pneumonia cases. So what happens economically with COVID? Well, tourism keeps dropping. Obviously, that happens, worldwide. We lose more jobs, around 50,000 jobs, and almost 500,000 people migrate. A lot of small businesses, many of the small businesses in Nicaragua went bankrupted because they didn't have money from the very beginning. And then you have a crisis like this one, there's no way you can sustain it. And then comes 2022 and 2023, people continue migrating because of the poor economical conditions. But on top of that, we get the humanitarian parole. Have you heard of that? No? So if you're from Nicaragua, and I think there's also like a couple of more countries, and you want to come to the US, and you have someone, let's say you're my friend, or you're my family member, and you say, you know what, I'm going to take care of Elaine. She's going to come here. She's going to find a job. She's going to be here for 2 years. And if she doesn't find a job, I'll support her. I'm going to take charge of her. And so you have, what you need to earn to ask somebody to come, it's ridiculous. It's like almost nothing. So you have one family member asking for 4, 5, 6 different people to come to the States. And so migration, as you can see, has continued increasing. And so what we have now is a lot of brains like good brains, like good skilled workers leaving Nicaragua because obviously you have a lot, better conditions here. And not only that, it's because you can taste the future. The problem with Nicaragua is that you feel like there's no future. Not now, not tomorrow, you're just living day by day. And so, I'll show you a little bit. This is how it looks. This is how migration looks in Nicaragua. So first, before the humanitarian parole, because it was not legal to come to the States, people would go to El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, Mexico, and then cross the border. This is the line to get a passport in migration in Managua. So people would make lines from 4 a.m. They would spend all day in that office trying to get a passport. And then the government started charging more for you to get the passport because they thought it was a good business because anyways, people were leaving. And this is our airport. It's a very small airport, and you can see the line. I don't know if you get to see the line of people trying to leave. When I was traveling on Tuesday, and so I had a very early flight for Nicaraguan standards because we only have like 5 flights a day. So my flight left like at 6:30 a.m. And I was migration, I was a bit sleepy, and he was asking me these questions because in Nicaragua, the government really wants to know why you're leaving, when you're going to come back, what are you going to do? It's not like here, you're leaving to leave, right? And so the guy asked me, what do you do and where you come from and then he says, are you going on a visa? And I was going to say, how else would I go to the US, right? That was my first thought. And then I thought, right, because there's so many people leaving on parole, you don't need a visa, you have like the parole document that they're now asking, how are you leaving the country? Because they want to know if you're going to come back or if you're just going to leave like once and for all. And so, how do you provide financial advice under those circumstances? Any idea? What would you do? This is a money conversation, so let's have a talk. But not only in Nicaragua, I mean, this is the crisis that we've been going through. But then you guys have all, in the entire world, there's crisis all the time. So it really doesn't matter what kind of crisis we're going through. It could be a natural disaster, for example. It's still a crisis. So what do you do differently? Yes?
I usually work with a lot of clients that are in a whole lot of debt.
Okay. Yeah. Buy time, I agree. You need to buy time. What else?
It feels like you need to acknowledge that the crisis is happening.
Yes.
Otherwise, they're not going to listen to any of the rest of them.
And I think that's the hardest part because it's hard to get out of your comfort zone. And one of the things that we experienced, especially in 2018 when like everything was starting, was knowing that this was not going to end tomorrow. And so you had all these gurus, like economic gurus and political gurus saying, the crisis is going to be over by July. It's going to be August. It's going to be September. It's going to be, and then we got tired and we're like, this is not going anywhere. And 5 years later, we're still there. So yes, acknowledging it's a big step because otherwise you're not ready to make a change because you're thinking, oh, it's just going to be a couple of more days. So, yes?
I live in Fort Myers, Florida. 2 weeks after FinCon last year, we got devastated by Hurricane Ian.
Yes.
I remember a lot of people I talked to. What's one of the most important things was psychologically, it sucks in the situation you're in, but you have to keep looking out the windshield.
Yes.
No matter how many ways you look at what happened and you lost everything in your house, you're throwing everything away, you have to remember, listen, I can't control that.
Right.
I can't control my destiny going forward.
I agree.
Am I doing everything best to go forward in the best way possible instead of dwelling on how much it sucks?
And I feel that as human beings, we tend to do that. We tend to go back and look at the reasons and think if we could have done something differently, but it doesn't really make a difference.
So, I've had experience in military operations, international development, and being an ESL teacher, and the best model I found is from a book called When Helping Hurts.
Okay.
How to take care of the poor without harming yourself. And it's relief, rehabilitation, development, and you need to do those steps in order because if you give relief when development is called for, you'll stunt the growth of the
Yes.
But if you talk about development when they're struggling just to breathe, they're not going
It's not gonna work.
absorb any
Yeah.
of that. So you have to think about Maslow's hierarchy and how do we solve the most immediate problems and work out from there.
I agree. So my number one lesson was that you need to have empathy with people, and sometimes it's hard because, and I feel that as a financial advisor, as a financial educator, as a financial, content creator, whatever it is you're doing, sometimes we might feel that we're here and people are there, and because we're teaching and because we're experts, we're supposed to either know more or always be providing advice. But sometimes when you're in these situations, it's really tough to even imagine what people are going through, right? So I want to talk to you about two things that happened to me during this crisis. In 2018, I forgot to say that I was pregnant. In the middle of everything, I was pregnant, yes. And we couldn't even leave the house, so it was awful to be always like locked in your house because there was literally a war going on outside of your door. And so in the very beginning, I felt like I had to, support people and create different content for them and just like being there for them. But it didn't really change until after I felt it like in my shoes. So in the beginning, I still had work to do. I still had brands working with me. I still had, workshops and things that I was doing. I was still earning money. So even though I knew through the news that, so many, hundreds of thousands of people were losing their jobs, and I kept getting 50, 60, 80 different messages or inbox or emails every single day, it's still not the same until when you feel it. And so just to give you an idea of how bad it was, my husband used to have a digital marketing agency. So prior, April 2018, the company had, just to give you an idea, 32 customers, like 32 fixed customers, and around 28 employees. 3 weeks after April 2018, only 3 weeks later, he only had 6 customers. And one of the biggest mistakes that he made was deciding not letting anyone go because the crisis was going to be over soon, and because you don't want to leave your people without a job. But then that's a huge problem that dragged on for months and months and months, and it was worse in the end. So in the beginning, I didn't really feel it, but after a couple of months, the brands that I was working with started telling me we can't do anything right now because it was a problem to post stuff on social media that was not related to what was happening, because even the people, like the same community who was getting this information and who were your own followers, felt like this makes no sense that we're going through this war, through this crisis, and you're still talking about your saving and you're getting out of debt, because they didn't really feel that that was a priority back then, right? And so brands were like, if we can't post anything, there's no reason why, we should still be working together. And because most of the people had to be locked in their houses most of the time, I think we were kind of ready for COVID, actually, because we're already in-house, right? I couldn't do any workshops. I couldn't do anything. So after a couple of months, I started not getting any income, and then I started going through my savings. And then 2 months before my baby was born, I was basically broke. Like, we were using credit cards all the time. And not because I had forgotten what was right, it's because I had no other choice, right? Once you have no income and once you start going through all your savings, you start using your credit card just like everybody else does. And so it wasn't until I was there that I actually started like really understanding and feeling hurt when people wrote to me and say, I'm going through this and this and this. And that's when the advice also changed, because you were also feeling it literally in your own shoes. And the second thing that I did, and this was around probably August or September, and the crisis started in April, just to give you an idea, I was so out of a job and out of everything that I was like, what is the only thing that I can do? What can I do? And so I discovered that the only thing that I could do was to give more. And so I decided to give one day, one entire day, at a friend's cafe, and I said, you know what, I'm going to be there from 8 a.m. till 6 p.m., and anybody who comes and has a financial problem, I'll be there to talk to you. And it was a very exhausting day. And I probably talked to around 50 or 60 different people from, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes. But it was really helpful in the end. So my number one lesson is that you need to have empathy. The second one is that you have to have flexibility, because you cannot continue doing what you're used to doing when crisis hits. So this is what a calendar looks to us in Plata con Plática, and you have like the post every single day and the copy and this and that, but it's not going to happen most of the time. And you still have to have the plan, because you might be able to create the content and post the content as you thought of it in the beginning, but there's a huge chance that that's not going to happen. So most of you, if you're content creators, you're probably used to having this calendar and then programming it, right? You go into one of those tools and you say, this is what's gonna be posted every single day for the next 15 or 20 or for the next week. And it eases your job, because then that's done and you can focus on other things and you can continue creating content. But what if you can't? And that's what happened to us, because when we program stuff and then something new happened, either the war, either the crisis, either whatever, people would take it negatively, saying, how can you be talking about this when this is happening in our country, right? The third lesson is that you need to adapt that content to the context, right? And so this is an ebook that we launched in 2020. It says 100 tips from 10 experts for entrepreneurs in times of COVID-19. So I asked 9, and I included myself, I was number 10, 9 of the best, professionals in Nicaragua in different areas like legal and creativity and brand and human resources and, everything that a company needs. And I was like, what are your best top 10 advices on your area? And then we basically compounded everything, turned it into an ebook, and then we set it out for free. We didn't charge people for this. This is let me see if I can play this. Nope. Okay. But basically what we were doing is, personal finance is always there, right? Because money is always there. It doesn't matter if you are in good shape or in bad shape or crisis or no crisis, we're always handling money. But then how you treat that content has to change when crisis hits. So instead of talking, for example, there was no talking about investing. There was little talking about savings for, big goals. You could talk, and you should talk about emergency fund. And I'm going to tell you something about that. And you can still talk about remittances, for example, in our cases, because that has been growing a lot due to the migration. And you can still talk about reducing your expenses. But then the more sophisticated stuff, right, like insurance and such, you need to be able to say, this is not what people are going to consume. And instead of taking it positively, they're going to take it negatively. And they'll probably stop even following me if I talk about this. Right? But then crises are also an opportunity for people to understand things that they wouldn't understand under our normal conditions. So one of my biggest learnings was, and I cannot tell you how many times I got a message or an inbox or a comment, both in 2018 and then during COVID, of people saying, now I understand what you've been saying about emergency fund. And I started blogging in 2012, March 2012. So 6 years later, when 2018 comes for us, when this crisis comes to us, then people are like, oh, I see what you mean. And then they were like, I wish I had an emergency fund, an emergency fund. The good part about it, and we kind of like joked about it in Nicaragua, was like, when COVID came and the world didn't know what to do, we were like, we live in a crisis. We're ready for this. We were already home because most of the people weren't able to go out, and people had understood the importance of having an emergency fund, right? So when this second crisis came, not everyone, but a lot of the people were more ready than probably people, for example, here in the US, who even earn a lot more money. So I think that the good things about crisis is that there are, matters that you wouldn't normally pay attention to until something happens to you. Number 4 is that you still have to provide valuable content, right? And the question is, how do you do this? So my number one take is that companies need to subsidize your time so you can advise to those who cannot pay you. So probably, most of you, if you're content creators, and that used to happen to me, most of the things that I created that were paid for were bought by the community. Where there is this budget template that you can download, and it's gonna cost $10, and then there's this ebook, and you create products and content for people to buy for themselves. But when you're in a crisis, when you lost your job, when you've lost the people around you, when the main breadwinner has migrated, you don't have that money left to do those things, even if you know it's important. So what we did was, we're going to talk to the companies, because companies still have to do things and they don't know what to do. And so that, for example, the image that you see right there is a Facebook Live that we were doing. She's a friend of mine. She actually migrated to the United States. She's a friend of mine, and she was like, when you thought about entrepreneurship in Nicaragua, this is the face that you saw. Like, this is the person who was like talking about entrepreneurship all the time. And so Kia, Kia, right? I did a partnership with them, and we started creating content, not about cars, nothing about cars, but only about, personal finances in crisis. And so we created a lot of tools. For example, the other ebook that I showed you, and so it was for free for people, but then you still got paid. And to be honest, I was even able to earn more money through the companies than through the people. And so this is a strategy that I've maintained, even though not that the crisis is over, but we're not where we were. Keeping important topics on your calendar, even if the conditions are not the same for everyone. So you were saying, for example, that when somebody comes and they're highly in debt and they just lost their job, this is the first thing that you have to do. And that's going to happen whether there's a crisis or there's no crisis, like economically, but it's a personal crisis, right? So there are personal finance matters that are going to apply no matter the time that we're living. And so you need to hang into that and say, this is going to be like my main subject, and then I'm just going to try to find certain arms and legs that I can throw here and there to try to give people what I know they need, even though they think they don't want it right now. And you're going to take a hit, probably, on, negative comments and people unfollowing you. But those who get it are going to really appreciate it in the end. Create new tools that make it easier to manage their finances. So we created a lot of, different ebooks, calculators, and everything on the web for us is free. We have around 27 different formats and calculators and ebooks and stuff that you can download, and all of that stuff is for free. And around 80% of that was paid for a company, like it's sponsored by a company. And then listen to what your community needs. And I feel like sometimes as content creators, we're struggling thinking, what should I post? What should I talk about? What should I write about? What live should I do? And sometimes you feel like you've already talked about everything. What else can I say? And so sometimes it's that easy as going back to your people and asking them. And sometimes we're not going to like the answer. And what has happened to me in the past is that people keep asking me for the same things that I feel that I already said, that I already written, but then most of the people are always in the basis, right? So you kind of you have to keep going back and just trying to say it in a different way, because people learn in different ways. I started this newsletter. This was actually this year, a couple of months ago. It's called Café Financiero. Café means coffee, and financiero means finance. So it's like a financial coffee kind of things. And now that, I don't want to say we're out of crisis, because we're not out of the crisis, but let's say we're not in 2018 or 2020 or 2022, and things are getting a little bit better, I'm able to write about things that I wasn't able to write about a couple of months ago or a couple of years ago. And so I started this newsletter in, I want to say either March or April, and I already have around 20,000 subscribers. And that's a lot for Nicaragua, right? In a population of 6 million, where almost 1 million people has migrated, that's a lot of people. Right, the blog post, like I said, we always have free tools. If you go to, how many of you speak Spanish? That's a lot I should have done this in Spanish. I'm struggling here, and you didn't tell me, Jesus. Okay, so if you go to the web and you look for tools, or it's going to say herramientas, you're going to see around 27 of them. You can, play for them, download them for free. Then I also started a podcast last year. So this, I'm going to take just 2 minutes to explain a little bit. This guy that you see right there, he's a friend of mine. We went to school together. He's 2 years older than me. But remember, Nicaragua is a very small country, so we all know each other. So this guy went with me to school. He's 2 years older, and I went to school in Mexico. I started finance in Mexico. Then I came back to Nicaragua. I worked there for a couple of years. And then I left to Asia, and I did a master's degree, part in Taiwan and part in India. And that's when I started blogging about personal finances as a hobby. And when I came back to Nicaragua in 2013, this guy had came back from Cuba, where he was studying like TV and video and something like that, and movie making. And so he was working at the main TV channel in Nicaragua, which was Channel 2. And in that channel, he was working at this kind of shows like Good Morning America, that lasts like 3 hours long, and you have like these different segments. And so the channel reaches out to me, and they were like, you know what? Do you want to come and talk about personal finances? And so we created the first personal finance segment in Nicaragua, which went on from 2013 till 2018. Because what happened in 2018 was that the government decided to buy all the private channels. So now, I didn't tell you about that. We don't have a newspaper in Nicaragua, for example. Like the physical newspaper that you're able to get here. So Nicaraguans, we make this joke that when you go to another country, we get really excited when we see a newspaper because we don't have a newspaper anymore, right? And there was a lot of the journalists and TV personalities and such had to leave Nicaragua. And Ricardo, this is my friend, we did the segment for 5 years. Every single Monday at 7 a.m., one different TV personal finance show. And so he had to leave, and obviously everything changed in Nicaragua. He now lives in Mexico. But then people kept telling me all the time, I love the show, and I learned so much through it, and, why don't you do something different? And so last year, I was telling him that I was thinking about starting a podcast on my own, like something small, about 5 minutes, just to give like a daily financial tip. And then he comes and says, but you know what? What if we do something together? And I was like, what are you going to talk about personal finance? And he was like, no, I'll be the host, when we were on the TV. And so we talked about it, and we started this podcast called Endeudados Anónimos. You get it? No? For those of you who don't speak Spanish? No? How would you translate it?
Debtors Anonymous.
Exactly. Huh? Ajá. No sabía. But this is just a podcast, right? So what we do is we get emails and messages from people who tell us like these huge, long stories. We read them on the show, and then we discuss them, and we try to, solve them. And obviously it's anonymous because we delete like the names and everything that could tell you who the person is, especially in a country as small as Nicaragua. It can be easy to sort of figure out who you're talking about. And it became the #1 podcast in Nicaragua, and it's doing very good in Mexico as well. And so we're always trying to create this free content, like most of it is free, but it's subsidized by the companies that I work with. So despite all the crises that we've been through, if you do it well, you can still help people make improvements in their financial lives. So I've seen a lot of people, for example, getting out of debt, starting saving, and now it's amazing because soon I'll be 12 years since I started creating personal finance content. That's a lot of time, and it is only until now, until maybe the last year, that people have been continually asking me, how do I invest my money? How do I make more money? And maybe you find it odd because I know that in the U.S. that's like one of the main subjects. How do I invest in the stock market, and how do I go into real estate, and because people have this capacity that if they cut down on certain expenses, they're able to do it. But imagine when you're living with $200 a month, how do you have money left for investing? But then a lot of people started really saving first for their emergencies because they understood that when you come from Central America, you're in constant crisis and it's got to be there. And after they discovered that they could save for an emergency, then that means that you could also save for something else like starting a business or investing in the stock market. And so what all of this has, allowed me, aside from the satisfaction of still being there for the people, is that you get to build credibility, you get to build loyalty, and you get to build trust. Because honestly, it would have been a lot easier for me in 2018, 19, 20, and basically all of the last 5 years to just say, you know what, this is not working, I'm just gonna get, I have a saying in Spanish, mi cartón. I don't know how to translate that. ¿Quién me ayuda? El cartón es el título de la universidad. Like your degree, right? And I could have grabbed that and just say, I'm just going to go and look for a job. And to be honest, I could have gotten a good job in Nicaragua with the titles that I had gained and everything, but that's not what I wanted to do. And so the payback for that has been, a lot of recognition, like I said, a lot of credibility, a lot of loyalty. So what you see right there, this is a regional PR agency. Regional, when we say regional, we mean like all of Central America. So from Guatemala to Panama, and they have this service on who the Central American people trust, right? And then they divide it by different areas like politics and health and influencers and so they had this space for finance. And the last year that they did this was 2018. For obvious, 2020 they just had to stop. So in both 2017 and 2019. I came as the number one person who Nicaraguans trusted the most to talk about finance. And so the interesting part is that in 2017, it was 13%, but then in 2019, after 2018, it grew to 29%. Then Forbes last year named me one of the 30 promises of businesses in Central America and Dominican Republic for 2022. I have that nice cover to show for it. Thank you. This is also a regional Central American magazine. It's called Estrategias y Negocios, which means strategy and business. I guess I'll be the literal translations. And in November last year, on different surveys that they did, they also showed that Plata con Plática, which is like, this is my brand, Plata con Plática, as one of the top 3 love marks in Nicaragua, that people really care and that they feel identified with in Nicaragua. And also that's only because of the support, for being there for so many years. And this year, Forbes also named me one of the 100 powerful women in Central America. And so I guess that for me, what I'm trying to say is, if you really love personal finance and if you really love helping people, handle their finances, you also need to be there, or you even need to be there more when there's a crisis than when normal conditions are there. Because when there's a crisis, it's not only the people, it's not only the community, it's not only the audience that's going through the crisis, you're also going through the crisis. So it's also understandable if you want to step back and leave and find something else for you. But if you're still there for the community, you're going to see huge improvements in them, but it's also going to have a huge impact in you. Thank you. So I don't know if this was good, boring, yes? If you have questions, yeah? Okay.
So I work for a financial education company for professional industry, entertainment industry.
Okay.
Right? So there's a crisis, there's a strike going on.
Yeah.
And my company, my boss is right here, we've been helping them throughout the crisis. We have people who are in our program, and we have people who should have been in the program, but now there's a crisis and we can serve them. Now our doors are going to open for we're having a launch for them to join our program, but it's $1,000. And my fear is when we're selling the program, I'm going to do it. How can you? This should be free. You're taking
Yes.
advantage of us.
Yes.
That's my first question. How do you
Yes.
handle that? How would you handle that? Because we can't stay in business unless we, enroll. So how would you? Could we give them free content
So I've actually had a lot of experience with that, and I could tell you about a couple of them. In 2016, I think it was, I was promoting this workshop on how to use credit cards and how to get out of, credit card debt, and it didn't go, like, we launched it and we never really did it because we had so much criticism from people saying, you're taking advantage of people who are already in debt. How can you be charging for this? This should be for free and such and such. And so we canceled it. It never went on. But a couple of years later, when people were actually more in debt, we launched it again and people were glad to pay for it. So my first lesson there was, I shouldn't have canceled it. I should have looked for a way to explain to them why was this an investment. And then the second one is we make physical products. So we have like a personal finance journal that right now on October the 31st is going to be our 7th edition, and that's like our #1 product. By January the 3rd, we usually don't have like any journals anymore. And in the beginning, a lot of people were saying, oh, you could why would you charge for that? You're teaching people how to save, but then here you are, selling this when people could just have a notebook or could have this or could have that. And so we learned through the years in experience to answer those questions, showing them, again, why it was an investment, like what they were going to get. And also, because you're already giving stuff for free, we told people, there's this stuff for free. We're not charging for everything. If you feel like you don't want to pay for it, you can take advantage of this. But if you want to, this, and that, and whatever it is you're going to accomplish, then this is an investment that you're going to get a return on, X and X. Yeah.
Perfect. And then the second question is, what is your strategy, or how is it that you found Kia and other corporate sponsors?
Yes. So to be honest, like right now, present time, it's really easy for me. I have a good friend who he's a business coach, and he always tells me, you're a catcher. And what he means by, what a catcher is? In baseball, like he's always catching the ball, because he says that I'm the worst seller in the world, and he's right. I never sell everything. But because of the content that I create, like companies will always come to me. And at this time, it's really easy. Like every single customer that I have right now, I haven't sold to, but they've come to me. But obviously that's come after, so many years of practicing and of creating content and of being there. Having said that, now that I'm trying to become a seller and not play catcher, I actually just wrote yesterday an inbox on LinkedIn to the communications manager of Claro. Claro is like a telecommunications company. And I was like, you know what? I have this newsletter that's reaching, 20,000 people. And I feel like it's the only newsletter of its kind in Nicaragua. And I feel like it could be a great spot for Claro to, show their products and services. Do you think that's something that you would be interested in? So it's always, in the beginning, I thought that companies were doing me a favor, right, by sponsoring me. And so it kind of feels like if you come from a weak spot where, like, please sponsor me, it's not going to work. But if it's the other way around and you're showing them what they're going to gain through this, exclusive spot that you only have for them, then they should be the ones interested in you. Yes?
It's a truism that governments in crisis tend to turn on the money machine and start inflating the currency. You've seen it in Venezuela, it happened in Weimar, Germany, and it's even happening in the United States, though not to a severe degree. How do you advise people about dealing with the political crisis and economic crisis to save their money when their money is losing its value almost overnight?
Yeah. So, because Nicaragua is very special, we have another special condition, which is that we have a semi-pegged, I'm having trouble with my English, I'm sorry, semi-pegged currency with the dollar. So the dollar, the Córdoba, which is our currency, devaluates exactly 5% every year. So if you go to the central bank in Nicaragua, Banco Central de Nicaragua, and you put, for example, I don't know, January 2024, you already know what the currency, like the Cordoba against the dollar, is going to be. So we have this duality in terms of our currency, and Nicaragua is very much dollarized, actually. When you want to rent a house, an apartment, it's always in dollars because the Cordoba is decreasing its value every single day. So restaurants, shops, I don't know, 80% of the stuff that you buy in Nicaragua, even if you go on the marketplace on Facebook, people are going to be selling their stuff in dollars because tomorrow I'm going to get less Cordobas than today. So it's a bit different. And somebody else? No? All right, thank you. I hope you enjoyed it.